Is there any precedence from the FDA that this would be an approvable drug given that one was positive and one was negative in their phase 3 clinical trials?
I think it's a really hard thing to say. I think sometimes we always joke that the FDA is a black box. So we've seen with the Alzheimer's drug, which was not recommended by a panel, that it did get approved. So I'm not sure how to interpret it that's there. I think the things that are of concern is that there's a reason why we do 2 clinical studies, and when one study doesn't show the same data and there's some inconsistent results in that study, it makes you pause for concern.
In addition, they talked about safety in the study, and there was still an increased risk of exudative AMD in the treatment arm. Does that concern you, and would that kind of make you hesitate in recommending the drug for all patients?
I think it is an important safety concern. I mean, it was great that the safety signal was less than the phase 2 study, which initially was seen between 10 to 20%. So 4 and 6% is better, but it is concerning that we're seeing that just after 1 year. And does that rate continue in the second year? And then the reality is these are treatments that are going to be given indefinitely. And so that concern can add on. And considering the limited efficacy of the medicine, I think that has to go into effect. And so I think from evaluating from the FDA perspective, I think the year 2 data is going to be also very important to make sure that safety signal does not worsen in the context of what efficacy you're getting.
If this drug were approved, which patient population would you recommend it for?
I think it's going to be helpful for a very limited population, a very motivated population. So I always say patients who have lost one eye to geographic atrophy really understand that, can see what's going on and are willing to put up with a pretty heavy treatment burden would be the ideal patients for it. I also think patients who have extrafoveal GA and who understand, potential vision loss, either they've lost vision in the other eye, those are the patients I think who would be most motivated and most likely to comply with a pretty aggressive treatment regimen.
If this medication is approved and you are going to offer it to your patients, what do you think the compliance is going to be for this? Good, bad, hard?
I think it'll be a little harder than for the anti-VEGFs we use so frequently because we're not affecting a disease that they appreciate in the extrafoveal cases in particular. But if they've had GA involve the fovea in the other eye, I don't think compliance will be a problem at all. So there's some that I think it'll be no problem. Some, there will be a significant problem.
We saw different data that came out of the outcomes from the Derby and the Oak study. Were you surprised by it, and how do you reconcile the fact that one showed a very statistically significant positive result and the other didn't?
Well, the other that didn't, it was very close, 0.0528. That's about as close as you can get. And I was intrigued by the difference in the ex-US sites, the Latin America sites, is where it sort of failed. And I don't know if there's a different genetic cause to that. I know they're probably looking at everything to try to present it to the FDA in the best light, but it is intriguing. And the other thing is numbers. I mean, it could be with more numbers, it would have been significant. Certainly looking at the 2 trials together, really strong p-value for the totality of the 2 trials. And I think that has to impress the FDA to a point.
So we're going to just go ahead and assume that at some point FDA is going to approve this drug. Thinking of your own clinical practice, help me think about how you intend to use the medication. First of all, do you intend to use it? If you're going to use it, are you going to use it on all your GA patients, a subset? Kind of, what are your thoughts today based on the data we just saw?
I think the extrafoveals, especially the monoculars, are going to be dying to have this drug, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it. The bigger population I have is those that are doing well on anti-VEGF, but geographic atrophy is slowly encroaching on their world. And a lot of it will depend on the true logistics. How do I get paid? Can I do 2 shots in 1 day? Is there a problem with pressure management? Because you can't expect these patients to come back twice a month.
So now stepping back and looking a little more granularity at the Oaks and the Derby. So we have a primary endpoint met and then 1 missed. Help me think. We saw data presented today, and the data presented today sounds like we don't know. What's your take on that?
There's 2. If you look at it, and they alluded to it a little bit, if it's a different genetic population, and you can find that particular genetic propensity, get rid of it in both studies and see what happens. If that makes everything go back, I think everybody would be comfortable. And another issue could be, some of the ex-US stuff is there a supply chain issue. That could be a double-edged sword because that could hurt your efficacy. Your FDA is looking at your CMC, and what do you mean? Does this have to be within super tight temperature regulations? Yeah. So I guarantee the Apellis team will be looking hard at those two possibilities. If not, it's a head scratcher. Yeah. I would have thought it would have been more. I don't see a reason, especially that monthly arm in Derby, where they actually statistically the same, but actually did numerically a little worse than the sham arm.
And if you use it in your patients, who do you think will benefit from them? Who would you select?
I'm an early adopter for a lot of therapies, and so when something comes out new, I usually use a lot of it just to get my own real-world experience with the drug. That being said, I think I'm still maybe on the fence for this drug, given I don't know what the real impact will be in the functional ability of these patients once they're on therapy.
And the best results appear to be with monthly treatment. Do you think there'll be compliance issues with that type of regimen?
I think the compliance issues will vary depending on the type of patient. So if a patient has already lost vision in one eye due to GA, I think they'll be a lot more compliant with their second eye, especially if there's extrafoveal lesions. But if you're going to approach a new patient that's treatment naive who has no impact from AMD and try to get them on this drug, I think there'll certainly be compliance issues.
And what do you think about the other targets for geographic atrophy, C5 inhibition or others? Do you think those are exciting and have the potential for even greater benefit?
I think the jury's still out in all these, the entire pathway. I think this is a clear indication that there is some effect from the complement cascade onto geographic atrophy, whether it's initiation of GA or progression of GA. But we still need to see the data from the other studies before we can make any conclusions.
So as I was sitting back and thinking about the data, sitting in the audience, when you have the two studies, obviously one that's statistically significant, met the primary endpoint, one that didn't, just barely missed. You combine the two, you're getting a 17% reduction in geographic atrophy on an annual basis, right? Looking at about 1,200 subjects. And so when you hear that number 17%, what's the number at which you would be aggressively pushing this to use in your own patients, right? Is it 15%? Is it 40%? Is it 80% reduction? Is there a number in your head that you're like, wow, this is kind of blows the doors off and I'm really excited?
Yes, 17% is statistically, is clinically meaningful to me, okay? And remember, it's 17% year over year over year, and our patients with GA are going blind slowly, not in 1 year, but over 2 years, 5 years. So I think when you look at it over the long term, that 17% is quite meaningful for our patients. Yeah.
And then finally, as I was looking at the data and thinking about myself, right? So if I had geographic atrophy in one of my eyes, would I actually want to get this on a monthly basis? So I'm going to flip that around and ask you to think about it that way. So let's pretend you still see you have extrafoveal GA in both of your eyes, and I'm your physician, and I'm giving you the option. Would you like me to give you monthly injections, and let's say in your worst eye, of Pegcetacoplan?
Yes, I would take it for GA, okay? But I think for you and me, it's easier. We have a medical training, we have understanding. It'll be a harder sell to patients that don't have the same understanding of the disease mechanism and the disease natural progression, and are not seeing any immediate benefits from this with each injection.
So you mentioned the Philly trial, and we were all a little surprised about the rate of secondary choroidal neovascularization. The Derby and Oaks data looked a lot better in that regard. What was your take on that, and were you surprised with the rate of CNV?
I was pleasantly surprised with the lower rate of CNV because obviously that's been a major concern from the retina community when we saw a dose response curve in occurrence of CNV and the pretty high rates in the monthly arm. However, we have to keep in mind the main difference was in phase 2, this was investigator determined, and there was no reading center confirmation. So, and I've looked at some of those images, the same have other members of the steering committee and others, and we think that might have been overcalled. GA is difficult because of the retinal tubulations at the edge of the lesion. They can look like fluid, intraretinal fluid. That might not have been the case. In phase 3, there was reading center determination, so we have more confidence in these results, and they are less concerning. They might also go along with efficacy data. The side effect profile parallels the efficacy, so it might all go together.
My thoughts are similar. I think I'll be very selective in the beginning. I'll be mindful of the the cost, the treatment burden, the cumulative risk over time of things like endophthalmitis and CNV and so on. So I anticipate, like Judy, starting with patients probably who've lost vision in one eye and who have fovea-threatening lesions in the other eye, or possibly very small subfoveal lesions who still have good vision and who have a lot to lose if we allow those lesions to grow.
Yeah, and Dr. Kim, following along with what actually both of you have said, you kind of touched on compliance just a little bit. So briefly, how concerned or not concerned are you with compliance? The data that I heard today suggests that monthly is pretty significantly better than every other month. So a treat and extend sort of regimen probably not on the table. What are your thoughts about compliance?
I'm concerned about compliance. We saw from other diseases like even diabetic retinopathy, where we actually see huge vision improvement and yet they don't come in. And we have older patients in this age group who have other comorbidities. So it's a concern about, if missing a couple of visits, does that mean that we're back to square one, or it doesn't really matter, we can continue because every other month did okay too? So yeah, compliance is an issue.
I don't think compliance will be a big issue because I plan to use it in patients who are really aware of what's going on. And the patient who has lost vision in one eye and sees that lesion growing over time based on our imaging and so on is, I think, going to be quite motivated to come in. Also, unlike, say, for PDR or something, if there's a loss to follow-up for a temporary period, it probably won't seriously disadvantage them. So I'm not too concerned that bad things will happen if they don't show up.
If this medication is available in your clinic, do you think you'll use it on all eligible patients, some frequently, infrequently?
Yeah, I'm a little bit concerned about the location of the GA, and I think I probably would try to look at select patients initially and try to gather. Hopefully there'll be some early results coming out of future meetings before I jump all in, I think, on widespread use.
That's fair. And if this is a treatment that you're going to use on your patients, do you think compliance will be an issue for these GA patients, or you don't think that's going to be a problem?
It seemed like in some of the earlier trials, compliance was certainly an issue. There was pretty high dropout rates, so I would be concerned about that. But I do find that a lot of my GA patients are just begging for any option, and they're very reliable elderly patients that they love to come in and are eager to participate in any clinical trial. And so I think these patients will be particularly eager and reliable in following up.
What are your thoughts about the fact that we had one statistically significant study, right, with a 22% reduction, and then the other study where it was only 12% reduction? Do you have any thoughts about why the data may have looked like that?
I think it's to do with what Jeff Heyer said, that in the other trial, 50% was a different location-wise. So we know the genetic makeup of patients with AMD is not the same across the world. So I think there may be some genetic differences. And just to we know now from other things that other factors can affect progression, like microbiome is my work, and different environments and different lifestyles can affect the microbiome. So maybe other factors that affect the efficacy of the drug or the progression of the disease, and some different baseline characteristics on the imaging. So I think that probably there is a reason, but it was pretty close. I mean,
it sure was. Yeah, just barely missed. Barely missed. 5.2 and 0.05.
49. It was 49. Everybody say, "Hooray, it's good." But on the other hand, it's not significant, and months are important. So I think we need to be careful and really find what was the issue, so we know how to help our patients better. Yeah.
And please join us again December 11th. We have our third and final installment of Innovate Retina. You can go to www.retinainnovate.com. Please register for that meeting. We're going to have, in addition to discussions on the OAKS and DERBY data, we're going to be looking at other late-breaking clinical trial results with experts in the field, joined by industry, joined by investors, as we think about collectively innovating as retina specialists and improving treatment options for our patients. Thanks so much for being on this journey with us.